Hi guys, welcome to Counterpoints. My name is Connor, and today we are going to be doing the Imperial Guard Regiments. And the reason why we're doing that is because they are awesome, and as you mature in your 40k taste, you may find that the faction that you started with is not the faction that you end with. I am, of course, a hypocrite because my first army is Deathwatch, and I still have my Deathwatch army that, still have things to paint. But basically, you could start with the orcs because they're fun, or start with the necrons because they're terminators, or start with the tyranids because they're superbugs, or start with the eldar because you're a fantasy fan, or start with space marines because that's how everybody starts, or that's how a lot of people start. But the truth is that you can learn to love and appreciate the lore in units of different factions, and that's kind of how the Imperial Guard are to me. So, excuse me. This art really says it all. This is somebody wearing Cadian style flak armor, basically t-shirt saves, meaning that, anything can punch right through this. This silhouette is very clearly a Chaos Trader Marine corrupted by the warp. And if you actually zoom into his eyes, he's facing it with steely determination. He knows he's going to die, but he's going to do his duty for himself and for the Emperor. And that's the remarkable thing about the Imperial Guard, is that they're just normal humans who are facing natural and supernatural horrors beyond imagining, but they still face it with the grim resolve of humanity's will to survive. And that's what's kind of darkly beautiful about the Imperial Guard, is that they are the untold billions that live and die for the Imperium of Man, and face certain doom with grim determination and sense of duty. And that's kind of like why the Imperial Guard are worth talking about, is because they're not remarkable, but they achieve remarkable things. And the aesthetics, have to mention them. This is World War I art. A lot of the aesthetics of the Imperial Guard regiments are going to be World War I, World War II, and 19th century. It doesn't have to make sense, it just has to look cool, because this is 40k. So this photo I brought in to just kind of demonstrate the breadth, the untold billions, the variety of gear, the variety of units and regiments, the big old monstrous tanks. These are Imperial Knights, they're not Imperial Guard, but we can talk about them later. But in general, just to give you a scale, the Imperial Guard, if Space Marines are the scalpel of the Imperium, then the Imperial Guard are the hammer of the Imperium to fight the enemies of the Emperor. So each planet has regiments. Regiments are raised from that host planet. They, the same way that in the, our current world, we have different ethnicities and nationalities and languages, and those are the things that flavor, our world, is the same way that Imperial Guard regiments all hail from different planets, and that planet tends to be the thing that flavors the regiment. So to get to planetary defense forces, a significant portion, approximately, at least I read this somewhere, 90% of fighting age males are never going to leave the planet. They are going to stay on the planet and be responsible for its defense. And this is the Ultramar Auxilia, Auxilia Ultramar, the human defenders of the realm of Ultramar, raised by Ultramarines and trained by Ultramarines to be the best planetary defense force. They are exempt from the Imperial tie. They do not have to go off planet. Making plenty of other Imperial Guard regiments jealous by their sweet Roman-esque gear and superlative training. But they do go off planet because they're just that cool and they're just that badass. And it's an honor to serve, the demigods of their realm. So for the 10% that do have to join the Imperial Guard and are not able to stay on planet and serve in the planetary defense force, join the Imperial Guard, travel to fantastic new planets, meet exotic new life forms, and then shoot them. That's important because it doesn't say kill them. When you're facing 40-foot tall superbugs, or 10-foot tall ape-like orcs who can smash your skull with their bare hands, or advanced Eldari who can spit out spinning discs of mesh wire and little shuriken blades that can slice right through you, chances are it's not going to be you individually that kills any of them. It's going to be a team of you all blasting your las rifles in the general direction of the enemy, who might be able to take out one or two of the fearsome opponents that you face. So there's no guarantee that you're actually going to get to kill anything, but overall you'll contribute. Which brings us to our first regiment, the Cadians. And the Cadians are like the the Cadians are the default de facto aesthetic for Imperial Guard at this time. You know, they have the flak armor, they have the generic helmets, they have the generic uniforms, but they're trained to an excellent degree because they're right outside the Cadian Gate, the Eye of Terror, an actual rip in time or rip in space time that goes into the warp. So they're right next to one of the major gates into the warp, and as such, Cadia has become a fortress world. I'll explain fortress worlds in a second, but there are pylons, technological artifacts created by the Necrons in order to keep the Eye of Terror shut, but nobody really knows them or understands them. And Abaddon the Despoiler, being the leader of the Chaos forces who remain in the warp, obviously Cadia is going to be a target. It's going to be a symbolic target. It's going to be a logistical target. Crushing Cadia is an aspiration of Abaddon the Despoiler, and as such, he launches, you know, a series of crusades to fight against the Imperium. But the 13th Black Crusade is the main one that we'll be talking about in reference to Cadia. So, in response to this ever-present threat of chaos and being right outside the Chaos Gate, Cadia is, or was, a fortress world. A little foreshadowing there. And what that means is that they built all of their cities to be giant kill boxes. So basically defensive structures upon defensive structures upon defensive structures, all meant to choke enemy forces into certain areas and then to slaughter them. And taking over a single kill box will not yield you the planet. You have, as soon as you take over a single fortification, you have to move on to the next fortification, and that battle will be just as bloody as the one that you fought. And that's kind of the way Cadians are trained from youth to be able to break apart, you know, las rifles and their gear and all that kind of stuff. And at the age of 16, they join the White Shields, which is the Cadian Planetary Defense Force, which is viewed as many to be as good as plenty of renowned Imperial Guard regiments. At the Battle of the Cadian Gate, the Cadian forces and Imperial forces fought Abaddon to a standstill, and as a result, Abaddon the Despoiler threw a Blackstone Fortress into the planet. Blackstone Fortress is basically a giant Death Star-style super weapon from the old ones. It is technology that humanity does not understand, but they have turned them into space fortresses and bases and all that kind of stuff, and they're trying to study the technology in order to figure out what's going on, but obviously can't unlock all of the secrets, and the Imperial Fists disabled one of the Blackstone fortresses that Abaddon the Despoiler currently has, and in a fit of rage, Abaddon the Despoiler crashed it intentionally into the planet in order to rip it apart. And that's exactly what happened. Cadia was destroyed, and it's now just a wrecked husk of what it used to be. And that brings us to the famous phrase, Cadia stands, which is symbolic of the fact that, what is it? The phrase that plenty of Imperial players like to say is the planet broke before the Guard did, to show you the will of the Imperial Guard to fight on no matter the odds, and Cadia stands to be representative of the fact that Cadia itself has given so many of its sons and daughters to the Guard that Cadia will live on in the spirit of the forces that continue to fight on its behalf and train new regiments off planet to be as successful and as stern and disciplined and competent as the Cadians. So Cadians continue to be the model. If you wanted to start your homebrew Imperial Guard regiment, then it's not a bad way to start, because they do have kind of like generic features while still being pretty rugged. There are females and males in the Imperial Guard. Anybody is welcome in the Emperor's service. So you could start an all-female Guard regiment. You could just have a mix. It doesn't really matter. And that's kind of one of the cool things about the Imperial Guard, is where the Sisters of Battle or the Sisters of Silence or the Space Marines or all these like very specialized units are often aesthetically and purposefully not ripped apart, but divided by gender or sex. Factions, Imperial factions like the Imperial Guard and the Inquisition give you the ability to be creative with who you include in your army. So that's Cadian's short, sweet, to the point. And if I can steal you for another 10 seconds, what I'm hoping my lore videos, while long, are accomplishing is just giving you meat and potatoes. So if you want to watch Lorehammer or Italian Spartacus or all that kind of stuff, they're going to talk to you about like battles and stuff that, like, you know, are interesting, but it's not meat and potatoes. And that's where I'm trying to be respectful of your time while asking you to watch an hour-long video. I just want to give you meat and potatoes, which brings us to the Death Corps of Krieg, probably the most meme-friendly, maybe not meme-friendly, but memeable faction in 40k as far as the Imperial Guard goes. So Krieg was a factory world or an industrial world, not quite a forge world, but still a massive manufactorum in its own right, building the war machines of the Imperium. And there was a revolt. So basically, the leaders of Krieg decided that they no longer wished to pay the imperial tithe or be loyal to the emperor. So they declared their own independence and kind of betrayed the loyalist factions of the planet. As a result, the Death Corps of Krieg were isolated into a single hive city that they held on for years. And eventually they discovered an ancient technology that allowed them to vanquish their foes, which was nuclear weapons and nuclear Armageddon. So they literally blasted 90% of the planet, traitor and civilian alike, and turned their world into a man-made death world. It is now just, you know, a husk of what it used to be, irradiated wastes, you know, mud slog and churned earth. But they continue to fight on against the remnants of the traitor factions that were in there with a beautiful or horrifying World War I aesthetic. And I mean, God, just look at that art. So horrifying and beautiful, but that was where the Krieg kind of earned their reputation, was that they were willing to burn their whole planet to stay loyal to the Emperor. And they continue to prove that loyalty both on planet and off. And as penance for their home planet turning traitor against the Imperium, now they venture out into the stars. And since Krieg is virtually useless, the one thing that it can produce in its subterranean hive cities is a higher breed of warrior. And you know, they use their masks to depersonalize. They have good gear. They're trench warfare specialists. And in general, they're just kind of badass. I guess mostly because you can't see their face, so they don't even look human. And that gets us to the memes. So at least I'm going to die doing what I love. What do you love? Dying. And that's where the Krieg are especially known. Like all the regiments that we're talking about are going to be known for being zealous. The Krieg are particularly known for not really caring about death and viewing death in service to the Emperor as the ultimate penance and honor that they are capable of in life. So just to show you how grimdark they are, their medics are called quartermasters, because if you can't walk back to the medical tent, they'll just shoot you in the head and then take your gear back for other people who can actually use it. Also, commissaires, Krieg commissaires, are viewed not as a force to motivate the guard regiments, as they are in other places where cowardly guardsmen are summarily executed, but they're actually viewed as a restraining force against the Krieg, because the Krieg want to charge headlong into battle, regardless of friendly or enemy artillery, and so they actually need commissaires to slow them down. So, like, oh my God, it's pretty cool. So they're renowned for being trench warfare specialists, which has started a whole bunch of memes. Here's an Iron Warrior complimenting a Krieg guardsman for digging an awesome trench. You know, their primary, in the meme culture at least, weapon for melee is the shovel, which has sparked a buttload of really solid memes, to the point that now it is considered, you know, like, this guy loves death and he loves using a shovel for melee combat. He's literally facing a Khorne berserker, a worshiper of the blood god, and he's seriously considering and will likely attempt to bash his head in with a shovel. So, instead of running away, you're coming right at me. I can't beat the shit out of you without getting closer. Classic. Kindly do not interrupt my digging, heretic, as a Kriegsman beats a space marine to death. So tell me about yourself. I prefer to use a shovel in melee. Before Acadian can get out the fact that he likes using a shovel as a melee weapon, a daughter of Krieg attacks him with love interest. So this is actually kind of what's cool about the Krieg is there's all these dehumanizing elements to them because they worship death so much. So some of the most like kind of like deep art that is like sincerely appreciated, at least by me, is this art in an attempt to humanize them, because at the end of the day these are just human beings. They just have been like fanatically driven into the Emperor's service, so they're still people. And this shows a young man emulating the Krieg warriors who are likely saving his planet. Here's a woman handing a flower to a Krieg warrior, and him actually turning and breaking his discipline to look at it, because he probably hasn't seen a woman outside of uniform in years, and he will probably die soon. And here's a Krieg warrior holding probably one of his comrades in arms that he was fond of, and will soon join in the hereafter. So just incredibly aesthetically powerful and really cool art that's very clearly World War I, German or Prussian themed. So that's the Krieg, which brings us to the Elysians. The Elysian drop troopers, my favorite faction, are drop troopers because, let's face it, jumping out of an airplane is pretty effing cool, and the Elysians are the best at it. So they come from a planet called Elysia, which is a civilized world. There's actually nothing wrong with it, which is very rare in Warhammer 40k. And it's in a cloud of nebula. And what that nebula provides cover for is pirates. So here's a human pirate, chaos worshipping pirate. Here's a Drukhari or a dark elf, who is, they're also known for their pirates and their raids. And as a result, the Elysians are known as incredible void-born and aerial warriors. So they practice, their planetary defense force primarily goes off a planet to fight space battles and to do void battles and to fight from flyers. They love their flyers. And their main heavy support are vulture gunships, which you can see here. And their main source of transport, well, yeah, I said vulture, correct? So vultures, which can have, twin Punisher miniguns or, rockets. They're basically just A-10 warthogs. And then Valkyries, which, of course, Flight of the Valkyries, is their Vietnam era jet hover capable, really cool looking flyer. Now, other Imperial Guard regiments can get them, but, Elysians, this is their primary mode of transport. They even have Sky Talons, which are modified versions of the Valkyries that can carry their light vehicles into battle, which are Tauros, I want to say. Tauros and Tauros Venator, which are not tanks. They're just light dune buggies with heavy weaponry and special weaponry. They carry bullpup-style lasguns in order to reduce the space that they take up inside their flyers, and they jump into battle using grav chutes, dropping into the thick of the fray and dumping las rounds and special weapons rounds into the enemy at point-blank range. Now, dropping from a dropship with a plasma gun and then blasting them in the face is very cool. And here's like an artist take on Harakani. Harakani Warhawks, which is like an unrelated but equally badass drop trooper that I felt like the art needed to be included and is now on your screen. So just go ahead and appreciate that. But they're a glass hammer army, meaning that they hit hard on the turn that they land, but after that they fall apart. And I can't think of any art to demonstrate this better than an Elysian trying to punch a Chaos Space Marine in the face. So of course the Chaos Space Marine is shocked, but basically that punch is probably not going to do much. And after that, Elysian drop trooper is very likely going to get chopped in half or slaughtered by bolter fire. So the Elysians, they don't see a lot of tabletop action, but they are one of the cooler regiments. And frankly, for me, like lore-wise, like ODSTs, like all that kind of stuff, it's really cool to see them in the 40k universe. And I'm going to take a breath and drink some water while you appreciate this art. So imagining normal average human beings who are well-trained with grav chutes dropping in the middle of enemy-held cities. There's some Tyranids in the background in this art, to save some civilians and to slaughter the enemy is really cool, but both in the lore and on the tabletop, they tend to fall apart pretty quick, and death rates are notoriously high. Speaking of death, that brings us to the Catechins, who are Vietnam veterans for an aesthetic, and they're from Catachan, Catachan. Who cares? I'm gonna call him Catachan, which is basically a giant jungle death world filled with horrific creatures. It's so filled with horrific creatures that the local wildlife is said to have repelled Tyranids. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with Tyranids, Tyranids are giant superbugs with a hive mind who consume other living creatures and then incorporate them into their slave race genetically. So like you won't see like human Tyranids, but human DNA is very likely in Tyranid organisms, and you know, lions and tigers and all that kind of stuff. As animals are consumed, they're incorporated into the Tyranid race. Well, Catachan wildlife is so fierce that it literally slaughtered all of the Tyranids. And the Catachan devil, which is one of the apex predators of Catachan, is actually said to be a Tyranid who survived. So it's no longer hooked up to the hive mind because all of its buddies got eaten, and now it's free to hunt and stalk on Catachan and you know, be a free bug and eat stuff. But just to show you how messed up the planet is, it killed one of the most powerful factions in the lore. It's so messed up that it's said that there were corn worshipping demons, and they came to the planet to conquer it as well, and they were likewise consumed by the local wildlife. So just imagine the kinds of people who can survive there. And, you know, Catachans or Catachans, they're supposed to be taller, stronger than normal humans. And the two ways that you can make a living on Catachan, I'm going to keep saying Catachan, I'm sorry guys, is to hunt the local wildlife or to join the Imperial Guard. And that's how the Catachan economy works, is you either literally hunt local wildlife that's more dangerous than you can possibly imagine, or you join the Imperial Guard, that way food supplies can be sent to your family. And that's just how it works, but it makes superlative, to use that term again, jungle fighters and jungle warriors. And we're just going to pause for a second because my computer messed up, but don't worry guys, it'll come back. And then on top of that, I am going to get a new computer this week, hopefully. So, or actually get an old computer fixed. So don't worry about it. So, for the Catachans, or Catachans, fighting Tyranids is nothing to them. It's what they do on their homeworld. They literally don't care. And just to show you how little they care, okay, facing Superbug, slaughtering it. During the Battle of Armageddon, it is said that the Catachan warriors were brought to the jungle part of the planet and let loose, and they hunted orcs for fun. Because they like it. And they think orcs are good sport compared to the monstrous demons that they have to face on their homeworld. They will go toe to toe with orcs. Look at this guy. He's living his best life. He snuck up on an orc and he's killing it with his bare hands because he thinks it's fun. All right, which brings us to the Mordian Iron Guard. So the Mordian Iron Guard are from the planet Mordia, and if you're unfamiliar, Mor, M-O-R-T, or M-O-R-D, in Latin-based languages just means death, and it's a death world. Half of it is a death world. It's tidal locked with its sun, meaning that one side is constantly bathed in light, and the other side is constantly bathed in darkness. And the side that's bathed in darkness is the one that actually supports human life. So Mordia is a hive world, meaning that basically human beings are stacked on top of each other in super cities, and they're home to a shitload of gangs. So Necromunda is one of the famous ones, but Mordian is also a famous hive world filled with gangs, and some of those gangs started worshiping demons, and they worship demons so much that they caused all four of the Chaos Gods to bring in their demonic hosts onto Mordia. Well, the Mordian Iron Guard, being known for being extremely disciplined and the only source of order on the planet, dressed in their sweet 19th century uniforms, literally stood shoulder to shoulder in Civil War style battle array and just blasted the demons in the face forever. And they fell back and back and back and back through the city, blasting apart demons in their sweet 19th century attire. And the wall of fire that they presented to the demons was so intense that eventually they just burn through the demonic horde, and they are one of the only Imperial planets to successfully stand against a demonic incursion. And so that's earned them a reputation, a well-earned reputation, of being particularly devout, particularly disciplined, even in the face of death, and to basically present a wall of fire to any enemy that dares stands in front of them. They do have a disproportionate amount of armor in their ranks, and they are said to have a disproportionate amount of Bane Blades, which is the super heavy tank for the Imperial Guard that is incredible. So the Mordians survived. They still serve the Imperial Guard and now travel across the stars, serving humanity in super disciplined fashion. Now, some people comment that the 19th century uniforms are kind of silly, and it is, but allegedly they're reinforced with like flak armor and like, you know, additional like weaving and all that kind of stuff. So it actually, you know, it's not as impractical as it looks in the lore. Which brings us to the Armageddon Steel Legion. The Armageddon Steel Legion, as you could have guessed, are from the planet Armageddon. Armageddon is an industrial world. It was actually really heavily featured in a campaign, I think in like the late thousands. Gazgul Uruk Thraka was a orc war chieftain who waged his war across the planet. In the Armageddon Steel Legion, the home Imperial Guard was one of the units that had to stand against them. The Armageddon Steel Legion, similar to the Death Corps of Krieg, wear rebreathers, but that is because their home planet is so chock full of noxious gas. And I'm sorry that we are playing this game again, but it's so chock full of noxious gas that they have to wear these rebreathers or else their lungs rot out. So they have a disproportionate amount of armor, similar to the Mordians, and their favorite vehicle is the Chimera, because that's manufactured on Armageddon itself. It's a troop transport, so their favorite tactic is to be mechanized infantry. They drive their Chimeras right into the face of the enemy, jump out, and start blasting them in the face. And that's their favorite tactic. Their leaders, their sergeants and their captains, paint skulls on their masks in order to intimidate orcs, because orcs are a superstitious lot. And their most famous character is Sebastian Yarrick, who was a commissar set to retire on the day of the orc invasion. So Sebastian Yarrick, being one of the badasses of Imperial Guard lore, lost his arm in a battle with an orc war boss, but instead, in turn, he took the head and arm of the orc war boss. And he went ahead and took his Death Claw or Power Claw and fashioned it as his replacement arm just because he felt like it and nobody was going to question him about it. So Sebastian Yarrick, super badass. Moving on. The Space Marines, just wanted to mention that they actually did fight in the campaigns of Armageddon in order to help them in the Second and Third War. But, you know, who really cares? Because they're just a bunch of, gene-enhanced glory hogs when the real heavy lifting is being done by the Imperial Guard. But here's some beautiful art, you know, of people fighting on Armageddon. And here's some Blood Angels killing some orcs because it looks awesome. You're welcome. Armageddon Steel Legion still do their thing. There is, or at least there was in the lore article that I read, still orc remnants in the jungle section that the Catechins did not take care of. But the Armageddon Steel Legion does fight off-planet as well as continuing the fight on their own planet. Which brings us to the Talarn Desert Raiders, which you're going to see like a thematic reoccurrence, okay? Talarn was a civilized world until the Iron Warriors virus bombed it, killing all life on the planet, turning it into a massive desert. The survivors, who were underground, I guess, came back out with their heavy armor because they are another mechanized unit, and they actually fought the Iron Warriors off of the planet, one of the only recorded instances in which Space Marines were fought by humans. Now, you could say that's because the Iron Warrior detachment was just a patrol detachment and it wasn't that big, but even the fact that normal human beings fought off Space Marines to begin with is insane. And the way that they fought them off is through raids and desert tactics. So very clearly, we are going for British SAS, T.E. Lawrence, Knights of Arabia, Bedouin, Tuareg, desert warriors aesthetic, and that's the Talaran desert raiders. So if you're a fan of World War I art or British SAS during World War I, or Bedouin or Tuareg forces, then you will be right at home converting some of your own Talaran desert raiders. So they still serve the Imperium. There's not any new models for them, but still pretty cool if you're into the North African, Middle Eastern aesthetic. Which brings us to the Vostroyan Firstborn. So the Vostroyan Firstborn are from Vostroya, which is a frozen world, and an industrial world, which has a very strong relationship with the Mechanicum. Now, there's like a noble house and there's like a Mechanicum leadership, and they both share power on the planet. And during the Horus Heresy, Vostroya stayed loyal, but all planets were called to provide soldiers for the war effort against Horus Lupercal. And instead of sending troops, the Mechanicum and the monarchs of this planet decided that they would be better off sending just weapons to the loyalist war effort rather than sending soldiers. Gilliman, during the Scouring, when he's reconquering all the planets, finds out that the Vostroyans never actually sent any soldiers to fight in the war, and as punishment, he tells them, you were loyalists, so I'm not going to kill you, but for now on, all the firstborns of the planet have to serve in the Imperial Guard. So as a result, noble, peasant, industrial worker, Mechanicum affiliated merchant, they all have to give up their sons and their daughters, their firstborn children, to the Imperial Guard. And as a result, the Vostroyans have a pretty unique aesthetic and a pretty unique lore. So their aesthetic is clearly Cossacks, Russian Cossacks. They have the red robes of the Mechanicum because they do have a good relationship with the Mechanicus, and they do excel at winter fighting because of their home planet. They don't resent the penance that they have to pay. If anything, it's a source of pride. And instead of being like all the other regiments of the Imperial Guard, where they just send out regiments all the time, and then as soon as you send out a regiment, that number is basically crossed from the list of regiments that exist, the Vostroyans actually continue to support the regiments that exist by sending the next generation. So it's actually common for entire families of Vostroyans to continue to fight. And because of the fact that nobles and middlemen, merchants, and peasants all fight in the same army, and because they have a good relationship with the Mechanicum, they have higher level gear and weapons. They have very ornate, very well maintained, very well crafted weapons and armor that is passed down as Vostroyans are killed or retire, which, let's face it, not a lot of people retire. So the Vostroyans are capable of keeping up an exceptionally high esprit de corps and exceptionally high morale, because they're constantly receiving reinforcements from their home planet, and then also they're constantly maintaining and being given excellent gear. So they maintain their fight, and they fight their crusades of penance, which is really cool from a lore perspective, and they're one of the more well-renowned regiments in Imperial history. Which brings us to the Valhallans, Space Russians. Their planet was a civilized planet. It got struck by a meteor. You're going to see a pattern here. And then it became an ice world because it was literally pushed off its axis to a point that it was no longer receiving the warmth of its sun. The survivors huddled in subsurface hive cities, and orcs invaded the planet despite it being a frozen hellscape. The Valhallans fought them to a standstill, and the orcs were trying to destroy their food stores. The Valhallans dug into ice chambers behind the orcs and slaughtered them, being one of the few planets capable of successfully resisting an orc invasion, and their tenacity and their intelligence won them recognition from the Imperial Tithe. Now they had to contribute their wintry fighting prowess to the Imperium as a whole, despite basically being an icy death world. And because it's an icy death world, God, this is frustrating. Because it's an icy death world, The orcs basically were not able to replicate, and the Valhallans were able to keep their planet. And we are just waiting for my computer to start reading the thing again. All right. I was about to say, we're about to just keep going on a single screen, which at this point would probably be preferable, but I appreciate you hanging in there with me through technical difficulties. So the Valhallans, as I mentioned, Space Russians, very clearly Space Russian Soviet aesthetic. Here's a Finnish aesthetic for the White Death, for the Finnish sniper, and they fight on behalf of the Imperium in frozen worlds where they excel in that combat. Which brings us to our second to last regiment, the Tanith First and Only, who I felt like were definitely worthy of mention. The Tanith First and Only, despite being one of the smallest regiments ever created, is one that holds a special place in my heart. And the second that you are done with your Horus Heresy adventures, you need to pick up Gaunt's Ghost's series and read. Anything written by Dan Abnett is phenomenal. It doesn't matter if it's in the 40K universe or in a different universe. Gaunt's Ghost in particular is just phenomenal writing and reading in every respect. The characters are great. The world building is great. The descriptions are great. The technology is great. Dan Abnett is truly one of like the greatest fantasy or sci-fi authors of our time. And I do not say this lightly. Like the reason why he's not as well known as like George R.R. Martin or C.S. Lewis or, Tolkien or something like that is because he picked a very niche, nerdy world in which to write primarily. But he is one of the best writers to ever write violence or war. I love Dan Abnett. And it borderline stresses me out because like I feel like I need to reread the Gaunt's Ghost series. But it's such like an emotionally traumatic event that it's hard for me to pick up the book again. So the story follows Colonel Commissar Ibrahim Gaunt, who is given command of a regiment because he's not just a commissary, he's also an officer. And this is a gift from his late mentor to make sure that he is taken care of. He is supposed to lead this regiment into the future and also continue to receive resupply and, just basically, become a up-and-coming Imperial officer of a renowned regiment. But tragedy strikes. And that tragedy is the fall of the planet. On the same day that his regiment is meant to ship out, the forces of chaos attack and destroy the planet, slaughtering its entire civilian population. And Ibrahim Gaunt only has time to save a portion of his regiment before the planet falls. And what ends up happening is this causes a rift in the soul of the unit where they resent Gaunt because I forget if it's intentional or not, but he saved them from the death of their planet, but he denied them the ability to fight for it. So many of these people are on one hand grateful to him for saving their lives, and on the other hand, they also hate him for denying them the opportunity to defend their home planet and to save those that they loved. And they know without a doubt that they would be dead if they had been given that opportunity, but they wonder if it would have been better to have died with their home world than to continue to fight on in the Imperial Guard. And it's like this beautifully deep and dark tragedy that like it rips at the souls of like every single one of the characters as they progress through the narrative. And there's like certain levels of like redemption and forgiveness and anger and frustration and hatred. And it just permeates the entire book with this like this deep sense of tragedy and loss and anger. And it's just like, I'm getting choked up a little bit talking about it because it's really, 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 really darkly beautiful. I love the Gaunt's Ghost book series. It's seriously some of the best stuff I've ever read. So, which brings us to Colm Corbec. which is one of my favorite characters. He's basically the dad of the regiment. He's Colonel Commissar Abraham Gaunt's right-hand man, and he does long for his dead family, and he does mourn the loss of his planet, but he decided that he's going to do the best that he can with the scenario, and fight honorably in the Imperial Guard and serve the Colonel Commissar, even if he has issues with it. And this is the cool thing. I heard this was modeled off of Sharp's Rangers, but basically the Tanith themselves are Celtic or Scottish, like woodland and mountain warriors who are excellent at reconnaissance, and that's their niche. So they're smarter, they're sneakier, they don't line up on the battlefield. They use reconnaissance and stealth to kill people or kill cultists and Xenos. And their primary thing that they're known for is their camo cloaks, because they're used really well to conceal recce elements of the Tanith. So Elam Ron is the opposite of Colm Corbeck, and he is the representation of the resentment and hatred for Ibrahim Gaunt for having denied them the ability to save their planet. And I did mention the camo cloaks. An equally famous part of the regiment is their very long knives that border between knife and sword that they use for stealth kills. But Elam Ron is representation of the hatred and anger and resentment towards Ibrahim Gaunt, and he promises to kill Gaunt one day, but he has several opportunities and still promises to do so, but to my knowledge, still hasn't, as far as I've read in the books. Which brings us to Bryn Milo, the child, basically an adjutant, a boy that's being trained by Colonel Commissar Ibrahim Gaunt as a mentee, but who ends up wanting to join the line troopers. And he's representative of the shattered innocence of the regiment, because on one hand, he views Colonel Commissar Abraham Gaunt as a paternalistic figure who saved his life, and it's only as he matures that he realizes what that truly means. That on one hand, his father figure saved his life, and on the other hand, his father figure doomed his planet to die without his ability to defend it. And if Colm Corbeck is like the fatherly figure who made his peace, and if Elam Ron is like this like resentful, vengeful, furious, boiling, seething hatred of the regiment, then Bryn Milo is representative of the innocence that has to grow up and make a choice about how you perceive the world. Are you going to get on with life and try to make the best out of a shit situation, or are you going to let your hatred consume you? And that's one of the really powerful things about the arc of Bryn Milo. Oh my God, I could talk about Larkin for like 40 minutes straight. But he's either a paranoid, he's an epileptic and a paranoid schizophrenic and a crack shot. So he literally hears voices. And in one of the coolest book parts that I've ever heard in my entire life, one of the best book sections I've ever heard, he's literally, his entire unit is missing, presumed killed. He's by himself behind enemy lines. He's waiting to take out a enemy leader. He knows and thinks that he's going to die in the pursuit, but Dan Abnett literally walks you through how to sight in a rifle properly, and it's 100% accurate. It's the same thing that I learned in boot camp. And reading that for the first time was like, I read that as a teenager. I was like, oh my God, this is so detailed. Is this accurate? And then I literally went to boot camp and found out that yes, indeed, it's the accurate way to properly sight in a rifle. And he hears voices from angels who kind of like talk him through the scenario, and he knows he's insane, so he doesn't believe the voices. But then there's these constant subtle hints that actually he is touched, and actually he is hearing the real voices of angels. And it's a really cool thing to think about in the 40K universe, where like people who are touched in our universe are just insane, right? Paranoid schizophrenics. In this universe, paranoid schizophrenia and epilepsy are just as real, but they can be symbolic of connection to the divine. And in this case, there's somebody who doubts his connection to the divine and ends up kind of having it. It's incredibly well done. It's some of the best reading I've ever done in my entire life is in reference to Larkin. Which brings us to Try Again Bragg. kind of like a big dummy that nobody trusts, or nobody trusts to be smart, but he's really well intentioned and he's really good, really good natured, kind of dumb, but everybody loves him, and he's like a comic relief character in a really like sweet way, mixed with like blends of tragedy. Which brings us to McVenner, a way less developed character as far as I can tell, but at the same time, he's like the ultimate scout. He's the ultimate, go behind enemy lines and survive guy. And there's a particular chapter where he faces off against a Chaos Dreadnought that is some of the most suspenseful and thrilling reading I have ever done as a former active reader. Tona Creed, halfway through the book series, I'm not trying to spoil anything, but basically they come to a hive world. I think it's Vervenhive and Vergast. And there, the Tanith are reinforced by the local gang members who took up arms against Chaos cultists. And Tona Creed is one of those gang members who is a proficient warrior. And because the gang members had to fight a losing battle against Chaos cultists, they already had some of the guerrilla warfare and recce skill set that the Tanith did. So it was actually kind of like a natural incorporation of this new planet into the ranks of the Imperial Guard to breathe new life into the regiment. And there's this tension between the new and the old, where neither one of them can quite fully accept each other, but together they become a synthesis of something new. And Catherine is just representative of like the regular line soldier who's likable and cool, and him and Tona Creed adopt some war orphans, which becomes this like symbolic thing for the regiment where they can see a future, because they have been promised that if they fight well enough during a campaign, they will be given a settlement world. So having these adopted war orphans and having this couple within the regiment actually gives people hope that there's actually a future for them where they could see themselves surviving and retiring on a settled world. It's a fantasy, but it's a fantasy that gives these beleaguered troops hope. Which brings us to Gol Kolea. Gol Kolea lost his family in the battle for Vervenhive. He's touched, not as much as Larkin, but he's still like tainted almost in a way that he has to deny like a dirty secret for a really long time. But he's a competent warrior and a loyal warrior. So despite his taint, his troopers and those around him defend him, and it really tests the loyalty between the troopers and the troopers and their chain of command, and their troopers and the Imperium, that they cover for this flaw in their leader. And the entire arc of Gol Kolea is like deeply beautiful and dark and tragic and sad and just like heart-wrenching. It's so good. Dan Abnett is like, he's a master. And so Gonskos, despite being like a very minor regiment, have some of the most fleshed out lore in the universe. And I know this, like, I know the Tanith First and Only because their planet's dead. I know that they don't quite match the pattern of the regiments that we were talking about, but I didn't feel like I could mention regiments of the Imperial Guard without at least briefly going over the Tanith First and Only. So, which brings us to my personal favorites, the Tempestus Scions. Like I love the Tanith First and Only. Like that's a big part of my Imperial Guard heart. But Tempestus Scions is what I would want to be if I was Imperial Guard. So, Tempestus Scions are the shock troopers, and they wear heavier armor. They have better gear. This looks like a Kazarkin, although he is wearing flak armor now that I'm seeing it. But hey, guess what? You just got to look at cool art no matter what. And to show you the difference between Tempestus Scions and Kazarkin, Tempestus Scions are raised in the Schola Progenium. The Schola Progenium is a school for war orphans of people of note. If you are militarily capable and you're male, you're going to the Tempestus Scions. If you're militarily capable and you're a female, you go to the Sisters of Battle. If you're administratively capable, you go to the Adeptus Administratum or the Adeptus Munitorum in order to be a cleric. If you're particularly zealous, then you go to the Ecclesiarchy, which is just the church of the Imperium. So that's where Tempesta Scions are created, is they are shock troopers born of the orphans of the Imperium. Whereas the Kazarkin are also special forces troopers with better armor and better weapons, but they are from Cadia. And if you were creating your own lore as a homebrew regiment, you could very easily describe your guys as like Kazarkin, come up with your own name, but they're basically just shock troopers that are well trained, better equipped. And I'm sorry for like the noise interruption and like the constant connection problems. We're gonna solve this, but thank you for dealing with me. But you could basically say that I have the equivalent of Kazarkin, which are special forces troopers raised on planet rather than off planet. But it doesn't matter because they're awesome no matter what. So the Tempesta Scions wear better gear. It's called Carapace armor. It gives them a better save. They also carry hotshot las guns, which are las guns with a increased power cell, mainly attached through the backpack. So they have better armor, they have better guns, and the hotshot las guns are actually capable of piercing the carapace or hides of orcs and Tyranids, so they're viewed as elite units. They travel into battle in Valkyries, similar to the Elysians, but their access to this higher level gear is way higher than any other unit. And they also go in Torox Primes, which are assault vehicles or assault armored personnel carriers. So they can be subbed out to the Inquisition as Imperial Shock Troopers, Inquisition Shock Troopers, which is really cool from a lore perspective because they're elite special forces. And in general, they have this really, really, really cool like steampunk gothic vibe that I desperately love this art. It is so good. Excuse me. The Kazarkin are a little bit more practical in their aesthetics. They have, the Cadian gas helm, but they still have hotshot las guns and carapace armor. They still are the shock troops, the better armed, better trained, better equipped, Imperial Guard linemen, and they are viewed with love from the Cadians, whereas the shock troopers are generally speaking viewed with like a sense of like distrust. And they're treated like they're elitists because they don't come from the same planet and they're trained to a higher degree. So there's not much brotherly love between the regular Tempesta Scions and the regiments that they are a part of. But you can deploy them as single force army, that's definitely going to be one of the armies that I build eventually. So here's some more beautiful art of some Kazarkins doing Kazarkin things, of some Tempesta Scions doing Tempesta Scion things. Landing in the middle of battle, blasting things apart with hotshot las guns, ready to carry the wrath of the Emperor to the front lines, and in general, just looking awesome. So, anybody who's been to war will tell you that half of, going to war is looking cool. So, Tempesta Scions carry that out, in spades. Which I think brings us to our last piece of art. And I wanted to land on a high note, okay? So the Imperial Guard are awesome. Maybe not as cool as Space Marines. In some ways, they're cooler than Space Marines. But no matter what, they are definitely better than any unit in the Star Wars universe. Loyalist or, Empire or Jedi. And the reason why I say this, okay, so like Jedis could probably kill these dudes. But here's a walker that is in the 40K universe. Here's an Ewok attempting to crush it. Because Imperial Guard walkers are not made out of aluminum tinfoil, it does absolutely nothing. The guardsman is truly bored by these primitive teddy bear attempts to murder him. And then the Ewoks are shocked that it didn't work because they just got done eating stormtrooper meat. And this Imperial Guardsman is about to eat some roasted teddy bear. So, wanted to end on a funny note or a high note. If you made it this far, and that's the thing, it's like I expect people. So, all right, we're done. We're done. If you want to click off, click off. Okay, I'm here for the people who watch all the way to the end, right? There are better lore channels than the stuff I do. Okay. The Warhammer or Arch Warhammer, Italian Spartacus. I'm trying to think of other people like I'm sure there's other lore channels and they are better. But what they do is they're going to dally and they're going to waste your time with, like, you know, battles that you don't care about and lore that you don't care about and like all that kind of stuff. What I want to do is I want to give you the meat and potatoes. If there's a cool tidbit, I'm going to include it. If there's cool art, I'm going to include it. If there's a cool lore, you know, facet or like a psychological phenomena or a book that I've read that you know, matches into the lore, then I'm going to share it with you, because I know that the people who watch these videos are as passionate and love love Warhammer as much as I do, or they're new and they're trying to figure out where they should go. And I feel like, while not being a perfect lore enthusiast, I can at least share with you my passion. So in general, thank you for watching. Thank you for tolerating my interrupting signals. Hopefully we can fix that in the next week and get another computer working. Like, share, dislike, subscribe, unsubscribe, all that YouTube nonsense. And I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one. Bye.